If you took every single ounce of gold ever pulled from the Earth's crust and stacked it together, you'd end up with a cube roughly 21 meters on each side. Now, just to visualize that, imagine a modest two-story house. That's it. A surprisingly small amount of material to anchor the entire movement of global power. Most of this metal isn't even being used in any active economic way. Roughly 45% of all mined gold is just for decoration and ornament. We're talking everything from simple jewelry to those elaborate cultural artifacts, like the funeral equipment of Egyptian pharaohs or even a solid gold Buddha. The rest, it just sits there in silence. A huge portion is locked away in vaults, mostly in New York and London, as bars that basically just gather dust. So why do we protect this inert metal with such high security facilities? I think we're really looking at a psychological transition here. How a chemically inert, basically useless rock became the foundational engine of modern civilization. To understand why we value this metal so much, we actually have to look beyond the Earth's crust. Gold didn't even start here. It arrived via asteroid bombardment, forged in the extreme environments of exploding stars. We're dealing with the remnants of cosmic collisions. As for why it looks the way it does, the explanation is actually rooted in relativistic physics. Gold's characteristic yellow hue comes from electrons orbiting the nucleus at speeds approaching a significant fraction of the speed of light. This velocity actually alters how the electrons absorb and reflect light, filtering out the blue wavelengths and reflecting the yellow and red spectrums. That specific optical signature is what first catches the human eye. But beyond the visuals, the material is a physical anomaly. Gold is defined by its chemical purity, its malleability, and most importantly, its resistance to oxidation. It simply does not tarnish or rust. It's incorruptible. Just think about a gold artifact recovered from a shipwreck centuries ago. It looks exactly the same as a piece mined yesterday. It's a bit of a mechanical quirk of our universe that this stellar debris became the standard for bank vaults. Long before we had standardized coins, people used things that were actually practical. Early societies used cattle, grain, and salt. Now, these worked for local trade, but they had some pretty big drawbacks. They were perishable, and they were expensive to keep. I mean, you can't exactly split a cow into fractions to buy some grain without killing the animal and losing its value. That's where gold emerged as the superior medium. It's divisible, it's durable, and it's chemically inert. It doesn't need to be fed, and it doesn't rot. Eventually, gold and silver pushed aside those primitive commodities as the world's dominant currencies. But here's the thing. This shift required a massive psychological leap. Because if you were stranded on a remote island, cattle would feed you, salt would preserve your food, but gold? Gold would give you nothing. Gold has no intrinsic utility. Its value rests entirely on a collective agreement. We just agreed that this metal serves as a store of value. This shared fiction allowed empires to trode across vast distances, but it also created a worldview gap. For example, when the Spanish arrived in Mexico, they found a civilization that valued gold primarily as decoration. About 6,000 years ago, burial rites involving gold ornaments, things like bracelets, beads, and scepters, showed that humans were already obsessed with the metal. For many cultures, it represented a divine connection. The Inca, for instance, saw gold as the sweat of the sun, using it to plate their temples and even adorn their faces. Chinese emperors once tried to consume gold to become immortal, mistaking the metal's indestructibility for a biological miracle. King Solomon plated his temple in gold to signal both power and piety. This obsession turned violent in 1519 when the Spanish arrived in Mexico. To the Aztecs, gold was for ritual and worship, not for money. But the Spanish saw gold as the ultimate economic instrument. This difference in how they saw the world drove a brutal transformation. The conquistadors simply melted down these intricate Aztec artifacts into uniform bars, stripping away the art to create economic value. This greed pushed explorers to search for mythical cities like El Dorado and Cibola, chasing deposits of gold that simply never existed. Eventually, gold rushes spread across the globe, drawing prospectors to the Yukon, South Africa, Australia, and the Amazon. As the volume of trade grew, transporting physical bars of gold became a logistical nightmare. This led to a crucial innovation, the paper banknote. These documents were basically just IOUs. They represented gold deposited in a bank and promised that you could trade the paper for the physical metal at any time. This shifted the basis of money from the physical object to a contractual promise. To keep this system stable and stop financial panics, the United States established the Federal Reserve. The goal was systemic stability. By acting as a lender of last resort, the Fed controlled the money supply through interest rates. These rates worked like a lever. Raising them cooled down an overheating economy, while lowering them encouraged people to borrow and spend when things stalled. For decades, this alliance between a central bank and a physical reserve provided a sense of global predictability. Currency had a defined value because it was anchored to a finite asset that couldn't just be printed into existence. But this system had a fundamental contradiction. The very metal that was supposed to stabilize finances eventually became a restrictive trap. Some critics argue that the Fed kept interest rates too low in the 1920s, which helped fuel an overinvestment boom, and then the Great Depression. And here is the irony. When the economy crashed, the standard logic says you should lower rates to make borrowing cheaper and spark growth. But the Federal Reserve did the opposite. During the Great Depression, the Fed actually raised interest rates to protect their gold reserves instead of lowering them to stimulate the economy. This is what I call the Golden Handcuffs. To protect the physical pile of gold in the vault, they essentially choked the life out of the actual economy. They prioritized the metal over the people, and in doing so, they turned a safety measure into a tool for prolonging misery. It was a systemic failure where a rigid adherence to a physical commodity became more important than the need for economic liquidity. By 1933, the financial system was nearing total collapse. On April 5th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an executive order requiring all citizens to hand over their gold coins and certificates to the Federal Reserve. The government then revalued gold upward, setting the price at $100 per ounce, which allowed them to expand the money supply. This effectively severed the link between the currency in circulation and the physical metal reserves. The gold was moved to places like Fort Knox in Kentucky, a massive reserve designed to keep the metal away from the public and under strict government control. At this point, the dollar stopped being a claim on a specific weight of gold and became a sovereign promise. This is the definition of fiat currency, a system that doesn't rely on a physical anchor, but instead relies on collective trust in the issuing authority. Beyond the vaults of central banks and the jewelry store windows, gold's utility is actually hidden in plain sight. A small portion of gold is used for industrial purposes. You might find it in the dental fillings in your teeth or embedded in the electronic components of the processor in your pocket. Because of its special properties, it ensures a reliable, non-tarnishing connection in the most delicate circuits. It's a quiet physical reality that exists alongside these massive economic shifts, reminding us that while we treat gold as a symbol of power, it's still just a physical object with tangible uses. So we've transitioned from a physical anchor to a psychological one. Modern global economics operates entirely on a shared belief in the US dollar and the administrative competence of the Federal Reserve. We no longer need gold bars in a vault to validate our currency. We trust the framework itself. It's a fundamental shift. We've replaced a rare extraterrestrial element with a social contract. The entire weight of the global economy now rests on that trust. Lately, nations like Russia and China have been increasing their gold reserves, which suggests a strategic shift in how superpowers manage their capital. And it's not just governments. In some parts of the US, like Florida, there have been legislative efforts to allow gold as legal tender again. This behavior shows a recurrent pattern. When trust in the state's management of money declines, people return to gold as an insurance policy. Right now, gold is used as a hedge against inflation, providing a physical alternative when the purchasing power of fiat currency drops. The real question is whether we're seeing a return to the physical anchor, or if this is just a new way to survive the volatility of the modern financial system. Our look at value has traced a path from the weight of cattle to the digital codes of today. We've seen how the global economy was once anchored by a fixed price of gold, a foundation built on stardust. The vault in Washington remains a symbolic reminder of that paradox, a finite amount of physical matter dictating immense power. Even though we live in a fiat system, the attraction to this metal still persists. From the historical medicinal uses by ancient Indian healers to modern investment strategies, our fascination with this element goes beyond mere economics. Gold functions as the background radiation of value. It doesn't run the world anymore, but it's where we go when confidence in the institutions in charge begins to fade. It remains eternal, non-tarnishing, and incorruptible.